I remember asking my mother-in-law in early years, 43 years ago, but how much salt? How much salt? Or how much? Whatever you need, what feels right. What are you talking about, I think? I'm Wendy Holloway, and this is Flavor of Italy, sharing the very best of Italian food and wine, lifestyle, and culture. Good morning. This is Wendy Holloway once again with Amber Guinness. And you will probably all remember that we did about 2 years ago, was it, Amber, an interview talking about your second cookbook, Italian Coastal.
Exactly.
And now we're talking about Winter in Tuscany. And this is the cover of the book, everyone, to take a look at. It's a completely different thing, though many of the approaches are the same in the book. So what inspired you to write this book after doing the Coastal?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So Italian Coastal was my second book. My first book was very much about Arniano, the home I was brought up in, the recipes my mother cooked, much more family orientated, much more to do with hosting. Italian Coastal was an exploration of these towns and stretches of coast that I found so fascinating, and the food and history are so wonderful. Whereas Winter in Tuscany is very much about coming home again, because it's about the Tuscany I've lived and grown up with. I went to school in Tuscany until I was from 0 to 13. And so that's the time of year I really associate with home, because from anyone who's got kids in school knows September to June, particularly in Italy, because there aren't any long vacations in between those times.
Right.
You know, we were planted at home and the main stretch of season was winter. And to me, roaring fires, ribollita, cinghiali in umido, all these dishes, that's the feeling that gives me home, the sense of home in Tuscany, as opposed to, I think most people in the world associate Tuscany with the cacophony of cicadas and yellow wheat fields and rolling hills, whereas actually to me it's the mist and it's the coziness and it's the dishes that are all in Winter in Tuscany. And actually, interestingly, the minestre chapter, the comforting soups chapter, was the sort of root of this entire book, because I wrote that chapter for my first book, for a house party in Tuscany. And my publishers rightly said, this book is about hosting. It's about having people over in abundance. And this chapter is so much more intimate, really. And we don't have the space. So it got cut. But it's been sitting with me for the past 4 years or something. And I was looking at it and I was thinking about it. And I suppose I was like thinking in a rebellious way, we must do something with my cozy soup chapter. And maybe there's enough to talk about to turn it into a book in itself. And that's how Winter in Tuscany came.
That was the inspiration. For me, a lot of the recipes here are very much my vision of Tuscany, because it is those comforting soups, those, as you say in your subtitle, cozy recipes and the Quanto Basta way. So it's those cozy, sitting in front of like my fireplace that I have behind me.
Beautiful.
Yeah, those kinds of recipes. And so that a little bit explains what I would ask in my first question. If we look at the cover, this cover, it's really, the entire cover is brown. The photograph is all brown toned. So it's almost, in a certain sense, a black and white photo, because it's just the brown tone. And it's very 1960s or 70s sort of photography. What made you do that photographically when your last cookbook, the Italian Coastal, is this blue and white and makes you just think of the seaside, a completely different thing? How did you come to that photographic decision for the portrayal in the book? Because most of the photographs are that way as well.
Yes, that's such an interesting point. No one's asked me that before. I suppose with Italian Coastal, you're working with the subject a lot, right? And so all the incidental shots for Italian Coastal I took, And it is just that the Tyrrhenian Sea, Il Mar Tirreno, just has that kind of bright blue vivacity to it. And obviously you have the Malaica tiles in Sicily, and just there is this kind of colour and sense of excitement visually to that stretch of coast, particularly in the summer months. Whereas I think in Tuscany, what I was so lucky, so the incidental shots and all the food photography for this book was actually not taken by me. It was taken by this wonderful photographer called Valentina Solfrini, who's so talented. And I went around with her, I think, for a week in December 2024, I suppose it would have been. And I was trying to get across what I wanted the photos to depict. And it's the mist, it's the changing colour, it's the layered landscapes, it's the cosy, the heat steam coming off the bowl of brodo. And she really captured that so beautifully. And I suppose those are the tones of winter, aren't they, in Tuscany, and I'm sure to some extent in Lazio, these kind of muted greens, these kind of gorgeous umbers, and those are very much the colours I associate with that time of year. And it's, I guess also the photography, we wanted to get across the idea that you're sitting at the table and it's cozy and it's less about il dolce far niente and vivacity and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. You used a different photographer for this book.
Yes, exactly. So the food photos in Italian coastal was Sagar Satare, who took some of the photos to my first book, and she's wonderful. She's based in Rome. And I think just tonally, we wanted something completely different this time. So we thought also, I am very much an amateur photographer and I'm dreadful at editing and things like that. So it's much easier, I think, as a subject to photograph a gorgeous bay in the height of summer if you don't know what you're doing, then
really lighting wise and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I said to my publishers that I don't feel comfortable being able to capture what I want to capture with my quite limited photographic skills. And so we found someone she's very talented in kind of those very moody kind of shots.
Okay. Yeah. In a certain sense, this book would be great for someone who's traveling to Tuscany, because you have such an in-depth discussion you talk about Florence, you talk about your own town and that area, you go deeply into Siena. So if someone loves food and they're making a trip to Tuscany, it would be great in that sense.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope it's definitely useful. I'm always a little bit reticent about giving bullet point advice in a book, which I hope people are going to be cooking from for a long time, right? Because in 2 years, that restaurant I love might be rubbish or it might have shut down or whatever it is. I guess, particularly in the age of the internet, guidebooks go out of date quite quickly. So that's why I suppose I lean towards more essays about history and context and experience of day to day, how it is for me going there. And then if people want to take that information and have a go and do a little tour themselves and use it, then that makes me absolutely delighted.
Yeah, because you do have the history, but it's your perspective. And I think if someone gets your book, they want to know what Amber's view of the place is and have a vicarious experience or even a plan for an actual experience.
Well, I do love that. Actually, my lovely publisher who lives in Melbourne, she was over a while ago before we published the book, but she printed out my essay on Florence and she had a day in Florence and she and her son just followed the essay exactly. And she texted me going, I've just done the Amber Guinness day in Florence. It was such fun. And just little bullets. I like doing little nuggets of culture. So nipping into a church here and seeing one altarpiece and then going for a coffee. And then she was like, it's very good, light but nourishing culture.
Exactly. I agree with you. And then you also have your pantry, the Tuscan pantry, and you have a little bit of a discussion on Tuscan wines of the area, wines from that area. Although you don't do wine pairings.
No, not necessarily. I think I'm not a wine expert. One of my best, oldest friends from the area who you will have read about in that, where I talk about wines, she is a sommelier. She's an incredibly high-flying, very successful sommelier. So she's my go-to. And actually in my first book, we did do wine pairings at the back. I like the kind of broader stroke of generally what I like. It's not too specific. And I hope in that sort of short little intro I've given on the wines of our area. It gives an idea of if you're having something really meaty, go for one of those kind of really juicy, full-bodied Brunelli or a Chianti di Serva or whatever. If you're having cheese, it's really good for that because it cuts something a bit lighter, kind of cuts through the fattiness. And yeah, it's fun, but it's quite subjective as well, I think, like anything,
Right.
what wine people want.
Yeah, it gives you a feel for what you could be drinking in the area. And then you have, as you did in Italian Coastal, you have different menus. It's not just the recipes per se, but it's how you would use them in the context of menus. And you basically have something you can throw together in a second, pretty easy. Ones for maybe where you want to impress your guests. That seems to be a recurring theme that you like to do. And even in your first book was very much about entertaining. So you like to do the menu thing.
Definitely, because so I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but we run residential painting courses at my family home
Yes.
in the countryside, and I do all the cooking. So a lot of my life, my job is cooking for, say, 8 to 15 people. I did one in June, it was 20 people. And that just does take forward planning and organizing and menu planning. So it's just, I have books and books and books of menu plans handwritten. And from speaking to people in general, a lot of the sort of block people have with home cooking is actually just the forward planning and the thinking about what to put with what. People really, I think people, if they're not cooking every day, that's something that they find quite difficult. And so I just feel I have this information, so I might as well share it. And it takes, I feel
Sure.
a lot of people like it because it takes the thinking away. Like it's quite hand holding, and it just means they know they can present like something that their guests will like, or that. And particularly, I think the timing thing, it's quite nice to just be able to flick to a page and be like, it's called Al Volo, I think, that page, and just be like, okay, what can I make in 30 minutes? Here's a list of things I can make in under 30 minutes. Yeah, and also I've tried and tested these things with so many different sides or so many different combinations. So it's a controlling element as well, is that I want you to taste the food as it's meant to be tasted. This is the best way to present it, or the best things to eat it with. So yeah, that's part of it as well,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. I think that Americans and people from the UK and Australia, they tend to like recipes that really lay it all out. So it's crystal clear. And the thing which you and I both
Opposite of the
know,
Italians.
yeah, the opposite, is this whole Quanto Basta idea. And I'm trying to find an agent right now for my book. And
Exciting. That's
yeah,
exciting.
yeah, it's a real challenge. So if you have any tips in that direction, let me know. But I do talk about that QB idea, that quanto basta, because if you're a native English speaker and you look at a cookbook that's been translated from Italian and pretty literally, you'll see many ingredients that have Q.B. Which means as much as you need. And I remember asking my mother-in-law in early years, 43 years ago, but how much salt? How much salt? Or how much? Whatever you need, what feels right. What are you talking about? I think. And you have that as part of your subtitle, Winter in Tuscany, Cozy Recipes and the Quanto Basta Way. You did you actually discuss, you did a little bit the quanto basta idea. You did talk
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, I've just always loved it. And it's how I was brought up cooking, because I was taught to cook by my mother, who is English, but she basically, when they moved to Italy in the 70s, the way she learnt the language and kind of assimilated into this new home and the culture was through asking neighbors and locals and stuff how to cook. And so that's how she was taught. And so she's not a brilliant teacher, I would say, because when I was young, I'd say, "Oh, I love your malfatti. How do you make them?" And she'd go, "I don't know. You have to watch me." And so she's a very instinctive cook, and she's a very quanto basta cook. And this quanto basta idea of as much as you need, as in if you taste as you go along, you can't muck it up that badly. If you practice, if you get comfortable making a certain dish, you just don't need to refer to the recipe. And in Italy, I find it interesting, there isn't really the same culture of cookbooks that there is in England or the States or in Australia, because people pass down recipes verbally. So why would someone go to a shop to buy a beautifully bound cookbook, which is more than the sum of its parts in terms of it's more than just recipes, because it's also other bits and bobs. If an Italian's going to buy a cookbook, I feel they go to Feltrinelli and they're buying a very specific scientific book on making ice cream. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
It's the very technical stuff that interests them more than the mood, than the escapism of kind of the English speaking world. And I just loved the idea of trying to put that forward. And obviously, if you're trying to translate that way of cooking, you have to, obviously, you can't just say as much flour as you need. But I would say in an English cookbook, but there's an anecdote I tell in the book, which is because I collected a lot of the recipes from the book from people I've grown up with. Who's this woman who owns the lovely trattoria in Convento, who I've literally eaten in that restaurant twice a week for my entire childhood and more since I've been a grown up. Or Grazia, who's this wonderful local cook, and she's taught me years ago to make pici, the thick Tuscan noodles. And I said, I'd love actually to put them in the book. Can we do a day? And I'll put it into a recipe that English-speaking people can read. And I gave her a bowl of flour, and we were making pici, and I went, so Grazia, we're doing this for 4 people. I know you don't really know, but just roughly, how much flour are we using? And she looked at me like I was crazy. It was like, beh, ci vuole la farina che prende. It'll take as much flour as it takes. And there's 2 ingredients in this dish. There's flour and water, so it's quite a key thing.
Yeah.
But I love that. Obviously, it throws lots of people into panic. But I love her saying it depends on if it's damp or if it's hot or if it's this or if it's that. And it's fabulous. And I think it really encourages one to not take cooking so seriously. I think lots of people, cooking can become a bit of an ogre in their head, and actually it's just dinner. You can't muck it up that badly. And if your pici are a bit softer or a bit harder, it's fine. Next time you'll learn and you'll do it slightly differently. And I just think it's a really nice kind of invitation to slow down, to take on a kitchen project, not stress out too much, and go easy on yourself, basically.
Yeah. And you start to understand ingredients so much better and how they go together if you do that, rather than just
rigidly sticking to a recipe.
Yeah.
Also, apart from anything, I think if you rigidly stick to a recipe and you're not tasting as you go, the key to all of this, to any good cooking, is at every stage taste it. This is something I'm always saying to my husband, he'll make things and he'll go, at the end, he'll go, I don't like it. I'm like, did you taste it? And he goes, no. And 12 years into our relationship, he still never remembers to taste things as he goes along. But it really is the key to anything. I remember ribollita, my sister doesn't like celery, for instance, and she was doing my ribollita recipe, and I was just chatting to her, and she was like, oh yeah, I just literally put a quarter of the amount that you say because I don't like celery. I was like, great, perfect. That's what you should be doing. You should be adjusting a recipe to your taste. There's no point making a ribollita which is full of celery if you know you hate celery. So I think in that sense, it's also a good idea to take recipes as a loose. You can play around with them. It's not. I guess baking's a bit different because it's
exactly.
But with savory cooking, I think have a play.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to ask you a question that you probably won't have an answer to, and then we'll talk about a few recipes that stuck out to me. Do you have a favorite recipe from the book?
It's so difficult. You must know this, writing your book, saying who's your favorite child. Because also it's a lot to do with moods as well. The one I probably cook the most and I find most kind of satisfying, and I make a big batch of and eat it throughout the week, is the sausage and lentil stew with lots of rosemary. And it's got tomato, and you make a big batch of it, and you just have it. You can pull it out, have a bowl of it, put some good oil over the top and some parmesan, and it just makes me really happy. And it's got like those nice giant chickpeas in it, and that's a really happy making one.
I love the Etruscan chestnut and chickpea.
Oh, I love that too, actually. I love that too. Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, and I love it because you mentioned that although they grow in Tuscany and have both of them for thousands of years since Etruscan times, you can still open a can of chickpeas and get some already prepared chestnuts and make your soup fast. So there's, you don't have to look forward to hours and hours of cooking for that. And it will still be really super flavorful.
Exactly. And it's quite fun, also something unusual. If you want to soak your chickpeas, of course you can. I quite like I love a shortcut. If I remember to soak chickpeas, great. But yeah, I do. We like a shortcut.
Yeah, for sure. I loved the polenta bechamel and
That is a
ragu.
really good one. That's delicious. Oh my God. Yeah, they make that at Nara's, the trattoria I was mentioning earlier, on New Year's Day. When they know that everyone's going to basically want a hug and a bowl, they give you a bowl, because everyone's overtired. They give you a bowl of polenta topped with lots of bechamel and their kind of amazing ragu. And it is just, and you eat it with a spoon. It's just heaven.
Oh, yeah, that just sounds fabulous. And then I loved your lemony scallops. The way you cook the sliced lemons first in the pan and get them a little bit almost golden, if you wish, and then remove them so you still have that lemony flavor in the pan, and then you add them back in. That looks really yummy.
That's so yummy. Yeah, that's around in lots and lots of trattoria around us, and it is just so yummy with a puree with a mashed potato or something like that. That's a lovely one and very quick to do.
Yeah, very easy.
A couple of friends coming over, and it's just very happy making. It works really well with chicken actually as well. If you don't have veal escalopes, it's delicious.
Yeah, but I think you mentioned using beef. More than just veal.
Yes, exactly. It's a versatile recipe.
Yeah.
If you don't have your Tuscan butcher pushing veal or beef or chicken on you.
Exactly. And then a couple of the dessert recipes really stuck out to me. We have a quince tree. We have everything that you probably have, like lots of fig trees, and you just can't even keep up with with the season. But right now we have tons of those not so large apples that are
lovely.
Yeah, too sour to eat. And I made an apple pie, but I was thinking, I think your Florentine apple cake would be much better because it's more than a cake. It's like a pancake. So tell us about that.
It's, oh my gosh, it's so good. Very traditional recipe specific to Florence. And there's a restaurant called Alla Vecchia Bettola who make it, and they make these huge sheet pans, a bit like a farinata pan of them.
Yeah.
They must be, like the really kind of 40 centimeter across pan. And
so explain to our listeners what a farinata pan is. Because
so farinata it's like a sort of chickpea. It's like
fritter. Sort of.
Yeah, it's a chickpea fritter. Exactly. It's chickpea flour or garbanzo flour mixed with water and salt and maybe rosemary or another herb. And then it's either fried or put in a super hot oven. And it's very typical of Genova, but they have it all over Europe. There are iterations of it in Provence and South America. It's a well-traveled dish. But they have these amazing farinata pans, which are very heavy kind of copper or cast iron, and they're about 30 centimeters across, 40 they're quite big.
Yeah, like
bigger
really,
than a pizza.
But really low.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a sort of slightly higher ridge, but very low. I guess like a bit like a very kind of intense pizza tray or something.
Right.
And so they cook their apple pan. It's like an apple pancake cake essentially, and it's very thin slices of apple mixed with very little batter.
I think there was like only 50 grams of flour, which is nothing.
Yeah, it's nothing. And then there's a bit more baking powder. But the guy, again, the Quanto Basta way, I was talking to the chef there. They very sweetly had me in to give me two recipes. One is the lemony meatballs, which is in the sort of meaty mains section.
Love that.
Which is delicious. And the other is the Florentine apple cake. And he was just like scribbling what he thought he did. This is the head chef of the restaurant, what he thought he did on the back of a paper menu. And he was going, it's about this and it's about that. It's about this many apples. It's one whole packet. I was like, 16 grams of baking powder to 50 grams of flour? Are you sure? I think so. Then, of course, I did that. It didn't work. So then I had to readjust a bit. And it's just delicious because it's this really low kind of dense baked appley cake, and the edges get caramelized because there's more sugar than flour essentially,
and that heavy hot pan too.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of crisps up and it's just absolutely delicious. And you sprinkle over some icing sugar at the end and eat it with ice cream or something, and it's a really extraordinary happy making dessert.
Yeah, I'm
And it'll
definitely.
be a perfect way to use up apples. Yeah, sour apples, be absolutely delicious.
Yeah. And then another one that I really loved, and that's because we have a quince tree, and quince drive me crazy. Mele
Yes,
compagne for anyone who's thinking of the Italian name, because to eat them, it's like
not
eating an
possible. Not
olive off a
possible.
tree. It's,
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely not possible.
yeah. In fact, you almost wonder how people figured out that you could make delicious things with it because,
It's so true. It's a bit like sometimes I think like how the person who invented popcorn must have been very surprised. What
right.
happened when
Yeah.
you bake
Yeah, for
corn?
sure that was some
Yeah.
kind of an
But
accident.
yes, but I'm sure with quince, you're right. Someone would have. I can't believe someone persevered to the point they did to because
Yeah.
it's hard work. It's really hard work to cook with quince,
So basically, with that, you cook it first till it's tender, but
but not
only tender and
overcooked.
not mushy, because that's
Ruins
the
it.
key.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's quite, and I talk about Quanto Basta, it's quite difficult to give an instruction of how to cook a quince so it's not mushy because it depends on the size of the quince, on actually how ripe it is, because it'll cook more quickly if it's riper, which you can't know unless you're the one who's got it. So it's one of those things you need to keep an eye on. And you basically so you peel the quince, chop it into four or have whatever size you want, core it, and then you poach them in very sugary water and syrup basically. And then what's lovely is it takes on that slightly orangey hue, the syrup, which is really nice.
Yeah.
And then this is not at all traditional, but it was more just I was like you, not able to stay on top of how many quince we had, and there was only so much quince jelly for cheese I could make. And so I poached them, and then I put them in a pan and covered them with puff pastry and made a kind of quince tartare, and it is so good. It's really yummy. And also they're very high, I think, in pectin, quince. So the syrup, once when you've baked it with the pastry on top, it becomes like jelly-like and sticky and a caramel. And it's really delicious dessert, again, with some ice cream. Heaven. Or cream,
Yeah.
or just
Yeah.
cream.
I'm
Yeah.
definitely going to make that. And last year, I did the poaching of the quince. And
Delicious.
when they were just to the point where you put in a knife and it resists, but it goes through,
Perfect. Yeah.
it's like the magic
That's where you
moment.
want it to be. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then I put them on a baking sheet with a card.
Yeah.
I forget what you call that in English.
Baking parchment, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
part baking
Yeah.
parchment paper.
Yeah.
And I put it in the freezer. So I have those bits
Nice.
frozen. Yeah.
Lovely. That's really nice. Are they
Yeah.
still there? Are they going to come out soon?
I have some of them still frozen from last year. But then, of course, next or 2 months from now, I'll be facing my next round of quince. So, anyhow,
Yes.
it's a never ending battle. But then you can make jams and all kinds of things. And then the other dessert, which is just a delightful thing, is the Sienese ricciarelli.
Oh, I love ricciarelli. They are so happy making. Yeah, they're lovely. Very ancient. All the recipes really from Siena are pretty ancient. It's a town that's very set in the ways it's set 500 years ago, which is quite fun. And
Yeah.
ricciarelli are basically, it's very simple. It's almond flour, egg whites, and icing sugar. And you mix those together. So they happen to be gluten free. So you mix those together into kind of, I suppose, kind of marzipan-y paste. And then you let it chill in the fridge so that it's workable, because it's quite a wet dough. And then once it's workable, you roll them out and chop them up and shape them into these little kind of diamondy shapes. Cover them or roll them in a lot of icing sugar, and then bake them for a very short amount of time. And they get all crunchy and have these kind of craggy bits on them. And so the outside has a little bit of resistance, but then the center is really soft and yummy, and they're really gorgeous and really quick actually to pull together. So they're quite a lovely present or something to have with
Yeah,
friends with coffee
to
or whatever. Yeah.
exactly, to package up. They do need to
Yeah.
be eaten quickly. They always
Quickly, yeah.
are. They
Yeah.
always are.
They don't last more than a day in
Yeah,
any
yeah.
I've ever brought them to.
I guess my last question is, are you working on a cookbook project now?
I've got two things on the go. One, which I'm really excited about, is next year we're going to publish the recipes from all three books, but without the essays and without the very long introduction, so that it's just in a slightly smaller format, so that it's just a really useful kind of kitchen companion to anyone who wants some kitchen Italian staples, but also the slightly more quirky things that I've done. So it'll be about 270 recipes or something. So that's very exciting.
So like a recipe compilation.
Exactly. So that's really exciting, and it's going to come out in the spring. And then I'm working on my next book, but I've published 3 books in 3 years. So I think, and I want to basically write one which is genuinely a sort of year. So yes, so that's all percolating and probably won't be out till toward the end of the decade or something, which is scary that we're careering towards that.
Yes, we're very close.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's all in that stage of notes and ideas, which is quite fun.
Yeah, exciting. Very exciting. Amber, thank you so much. This has been great. And when winter starts to roll around, everyone take a look.
Yes.
Grab this book. I'll put a link in the show notes, and some great winter recipes that you don't have to be in Tuscany to make them. And they're just wonderful, cuddly, cozy recipes, as you say.
Oh, Andy, thank you so much for having me back. It's always so lovely to chat to you.
Thanks. This has been Flavor of Italy. Find us on www.flavorofitaly.com and on Substack, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, always as Flavor of Italy.